I'm RJ Gottlieb. I've been the driver of Big Red Camaro since 1987. Big Red is the fastest 69 Camaro in the world. With 2,000 horsepower, this beast is ready to dominate the road.
I love Willow Springs. This track and Sears Point were the first courses I drove on, and in fact, I took the driving schools at. These are the tracks where I learned how to drive.
Willow Springs is a real fun racetrack. It has a fairly long straightaway, it has elevation changes, it has bank turns, it has hills, fast sweepers, so it does have a little bit of everything for everybody. It's definitely his home track, and he knows it top to bottom.
Well, I started racing back in 1986. I was 16.
That led to doing a race course at Bob Bondurant, which used to be up in Sears Point.
Back then, I was like, hey, let's go do something fun. Let's get into racing. Like, let's go to the driving school. Let's do that. Once I kind of got out on the track and did that, I kind of got the bug.
He was a very good driver. At the same time, we got into drag racing.
And it just seemed the right place to start because you could begin drag racing at 16, where road racing required you to be 18. Me and my dad were hot to get started in something.
And so Dan calls me on the phone and says, I want to get Richard a car that we can drag race so they won't get hurt racing on the street. We go to the first race that Richard's ever gone to. It's Bakersfield, and he beats a friend of mine.
He did learn a lot about tires, about hooking up, about transmissions, about delivering power to the ground.
Yeah, drag racing was always fun, but I always kind of wanted to get back to the track and racing, like what I was doing up at Sears Point in Willow Springs. Well, it was through Bob Lambeck that we met other people that got us into these events, like La Carrera and Silver State Classic.
I introduced him to Chris Kaufman, who was really likes road racing.
Well, La Carrera was just presented to me by Bill Strop. And I said, I've got a young guy, a young driver, and he'd like to get involved in racing. I can't find a place that a kid 15 and a half, 16 years old can get into a car. And he goes, well, you ought to go and run that race in La Carrera. They're going to run the La Carrera race again. I don't think anybody will care down there. If you can get across the border, he says, you can probably drive.
And it was Gottlieb who took the checkered flag, covering the course in 56.8 minutes.
At the time, Big Red was like a for fun car, and we're kind of making it for the La Carrera, but we also might run it on the road and this kind of stuff. Where the super production car was more like a real race car. We were going to enter it into some real series and do some real racing.
Wanted to build something that we could race a few different series with because we weren't sure what direction we were going. We made it legal for Southwest Tour, made it legal for SCCA, and made it legal for IMSA.
My dad's vision for racing was more than just me and him coming out to the track with a car. My dad wanted a whole team, a guy to set up the suspension, an engine builder, crew to do whatever we needed done out there. Raceway was really the beginning of that. He saw a lot of the other professional teams that did the racing, and I think he was inspired by that. That was the organization that my dad built that started it all. It was always fun to be out there as like the young kid. It was like you'd be racing against these guys that were in their 50s, have been racing their whole life, in a way people didn't expect as much from you because you were just like a dumb kid wet behind the ears, but then yet if you could pull it out, it was like people were like, oh my God, look at what the kid did,
Charlie Chris noticed a big tire mark on the side of the car. Where did that come from? Yeah, one of the tire marks is from Steve, and the other one's from Andy.
These races were long and hot and tiring, and I definitely think there's something about the youthfulness or staying aggressive, staying on top of it, never letting go, even though the guy in front of me is a much more experienced racer, and I'm sure he's using all his experience to keep the kid off his ass who's just not giving up, you know what I mean? And that's a little bit the way it is. As long as they're not too fast, I can usually grind them down if I'm close to them lap after lap. The less experienced drivers will just get rattled after a few laps. And it was real competitive every race, and oftentimes they had big ball ups like in the first turn, and it was really sort of scrappy, door-to-door, stock car racing. But it was still an amateur series. There were no big sponsors. They kept the rules purposely loose so they could attract cars from other series to come and race. And this was a unique opportunity. A lot of the big bore cars that really didn't get a chance to run in a lot of other series came out for this. And it was really quite competitive. And it's really where I learned how to drive and, compete with the big boys.
In fact, he won the Willow Springs, what they called Superstock.
I just want to thank my dad, Cliff, Dave, and Russ for all putting in a hard effort and making it all possible. Okay, the 89 champion here, ladies and gentlemen, RJ Gottlieb from Los Angeles. Good for us.
Most of the racing events we competed in, I couldn't run Big Red, and Willow Springs was no exception. I was running GT1, Super Production, Sportsman out here, and Big Red just didn't fit into any of the categories. It just didn't work for that type of racing.
This world of organized track racing didn't have a place for Big Red. It didn't fit into their categories, so never could the two meet.
Other racers at the track would be fascinated by the type of outlaw events that I did with Big Red. They were a lot edgier. They were non-sanctioned, often in other countries like Mexico. And this was something that a lot of track racers just weren't willing to do. It's a lot of really high speed, top speed stuff, and I certainly got a lot of notoriety out of it. And then eventually we got more serious when we got into SCCA and Trans Am and IMSA and GTS, GTO, GTU.
There you see the number 77. That is R.J. Gottlieb from Los Angeles, just 21 years of age. Still in college up in Santa Barbara, California.
And those were big-time events where there was all like the factory cars, which we would lag, and then we kind of competed in our own group of sort of privately funded cars.
We were right up there racing with the factory sponsors and the world-class drivers and extremely competitive with them.
We always did very well in the privately funded group, and we were proud of that.
We did all those tracks, and you did very well.
Looking back on it, the ones that really made the most sense for us were the ones that they did at Willow Springs, you know, because the track was close by. This and Sears Point were the first tracks that I really learned how to drive on. I have more miles at Willow Springs than any other track. I have more miles wheel-to-wheel racing at Willow Springs than any other track. As time went on, I think as I got older and I went back and got my MBA, I came to the realization that I'm not going to be a professional race car driver. And as much out of choice as anything else. You know, it wasn't going to be what I was going to do for a living. So in a sense, that type of racing started to decline. And so as we sold some of the cars, we said, hey, do we still want to go racing? And we did. And, you know, the obvious car was Big Red because it was the one back from the beginning. It was the one that we were starting to become known for. 25 years later, I think I finally found the place that I was to belong in racing. And that was in these unique one-off racing events with Big Red.
Want more adrenaline-fueled action? Then hit the like, follow, and subscribe button. Well, come join us for heart-pounding thrills and high-speed excitement.